Good evening, everyone. We are back in 1 Corinthians. We may actually make a lot of progress tonight. We're going to have to wait and see, but we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Just a quick update on where we've been and where we've been going here. Of course, 1 Corinthians, Corinth was very prosperous metropolitan city, actually financially the most important city in the province there. They were very sexually immoral. They had a temple there where part of worshiping was engaging in sexual relations with other people. And it was a tough market. It'd be like having a church today started in Bangkok, Thailand. But the biggest problem they had there, at least the one addressed out front, was division. We talked about that. They were, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Paul, I'm of Christ, and Paul sort of shut that down really quick, which he should have been. And then he said, hey, all these people think they're so smart there? They're not. And then he went on to deal with the problem of sexual sin that they were having there in the church. Then he went on to talk about married life and dealing with relations there and being married and not being married. What's best? We also learned, quite frankly, that there are more than one thing that is okay. As we talked about last week, Paul said, it'd be great if you could remain single and dedicate your life to the Lord and focus just on that. But if you're not able to do that, get married. That doesn't mean either one of them is wrong, because either one of them are okay. And that's something we should always remember. We have to look, especially when we get talking about other people, which we're about to actually delve into right here. And I'm going to make a statement before we get into chapter 8 here, and I'm not sure if I left this slide up there or not, Paul, but it says balance between understanding, education, and love for a brother in all things. Because things can be taken one way too far and can be taken another way too far. So that's that balance there. We have to understand. There's sometimes we may have to help educate a brother. There may be times we need education. But paramount through all of that, you have to have love for your brother in Christ and work together to work things out. So we're starting a little bit of a new section here in chapter 8. And, the title there was how they throw those titles in there, which weren't there when it was written. But it's concerning food sacrificed to idols. It starts out in chapter 8, verse 1. It says, Paul goes, now about food sacrificed to idols. We know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. But whoever loves God is known by God. Now let's look at what he's saying here a little bit. He's addressing a question. We talked about that last week, how they had written him a letter and he had addressed some of the things. And this is the idol meat, the people eating meat from sacrifice to idols and temples there was one of the questions. And there's two schools of thought on that that we'll touch on. One is, well, first of all, let's talk about this first three verses. And if you notice in verse 1, we know that we all possess knowledge. Remember the Greeks? That was such a Greek thing for them to be. They were very proud of having knowledge. But you notice he says, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Another way they were segregating themselves, if you will, trying to set themselves apart from their brothers. If you notice in verse 2, those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. But whoever loves God is known by God. What does Paul mean by verse 2 and verse 3? That's what we're about to talk about. And what he explains to them. What they think they know, which they correctly do, that idols are nothing but a piece of wood or stone, and it's not that big a deal. You're not going to sin by eating the meat from that was sacrificed to an idol. That's correct. You have that knowledge. But what Paul's saying is, you know that, so you think you know all this. But the truth is, you have to have that balance and love for your brother and understanding. You don't understand that yet, and you may cause him to fall, which would be worse. So that's what Paul's referring to there when he says, you think you know something, but you don't know what you ought to know. And he's about to explain that to them in chapter 8, basically. So again, the eating of meat, there's two thoughts on that. You had a group of them that obviously understood that idols were nothing at all. So it's not a big deal to eat the meat that was sacrificed in the temples to the idols. However, others disagreed. They felt that consuming the meat was basically an endorsement of the idols and somehow impure and somehow sinful. So you've got this problem. What can we relate this to today? Can anybody give me an example? Actually, you can relate it to eating meat today. 25 years ago, driving through Atlanta, they had signs up all over, billboards. Jesus was a vegetarian. Jesus said, "Thou shalt not kill," with cows and chickens and stuff. And people pushing this thought that you have to be a vegetarian. See, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were vegetarians. There are people misled, not understanding properly different things about the Bible and what it says you can and cannot do. Let me ask you about smoking. Well, what does it say about smoking in the Bible? I don't think it's actually addressed in the Bible, is it? Now it says your body's a temple. Yeah. Well, does that mean if you're fat, you're going to hell? What about being obese? What about gluttony? Where do we draw the line here? Are we going to start weighing people as they come in the church to see what their BMI is? Y'all think I'm kidding. I was at polishing the pulpit 4 years ago. Guys behind me, and the guy was talking about gluttony in the session, and the guys behind me saying, "Well, if you're fat, you ain't going to get in heaven." I turned around and looked at him, just got up and left. There are some people out there with crazy ideas. And the question is, where do you draw the line? How do you have this balance with people? Do you have to stop doing everything because someone out there may think it's a sin? I had a professor when I was in Bible school, told me point blank in front of the class, said, "I don't know how a Christian could own a Rolex." I told him, "Wow, what about someone that owns 4? Got up and walked out. There are some crazy thoughts in this world. You will run up against them. Paul's pointing out how we should deal with them right here. That's what we'll talk about tonight. Okay, picking up in verse 4. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols. We know that, quote, an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, little g, whether in heaven or on earth, parentheses, as indeed there are many little gods and many little l lords in quotations, yet for us there is but one God, true God, capital G, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. A couple of things I want to point out in that section of verses there. You notice it says, an idol is nothing at all in the world. We know that. They knew that. Most did. And there's only one God. But we move on to verse 7. It says, but now everyone possesses, it says, but not everyone possesses this knowledge. That's showing the difference between the groups there. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificed food, they think of it as being sacrificed to a god, little g. And since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. You got to remember, as with the sexual sin that was going on there at the time that was very prevalent, most of the temples had feast halls where you could go in and eat. Cheap, a whole lot cheaper than going to the meat market and buying stuff. And people took advantage of that. Whether they were, most of them didn't matter what temple it was, they'd go in and eat well and next to nothing. And there were Christians doing that. And then there were some Christians over there going, man, is that right? Should you be doing that? Oh no, Tim, you're not wearing a tie and suit. Is that right? 20 years ago, I would have worn a suit and tie. But people today mostly are so accustomed to a different, I don't want to say fashion, but casual Friday has become casual Sunday in a lot of ways. Of course, there's nothing wrong with dressing up. Nothing wrong at all. Y'all know sometimes I do that. Sometimes I don't. It's about what's in here. I can put clothes on all day long and look great, in my mind. But it doesn't change the person I am. We pick back up here. See, what they've got is they've got some people that were used to worshiping in these temples. And they thought these little g gods were, gods. Now they know the truth, but they're so close to being out of that experience, it's causing them some problems in their minds. Verse 8 tells us, but food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Ooh, food does not bring us closer to God. What about keeping the law? We're not supposed to eat pork. Oh, wait, that's the first covenant, isn't it? Yeah, almost forgot. That was some sarcasm there. We are under the second covenant. We are no longer under the Mosaic laws that were handed down to the physical nation of Israel. Verse 9, be careful, however. Now, he's talking to the ones here that know better, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. And that's what Paul's saying you can't do. You got to be careful. Matter of fact, he says, be careful. That the things you do doesn't cause, when we talk about your weaker brother or sister, to basically sin. And to them, eating that food would be sinful. So them eating that food would be sinful in their mind and in their conscience. Picked up in verse 12, it says, when you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience. Did you notice it says, when you sin against them and wound them in this way, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. Okay? Does this mean we shouldn't eat meat? Does this mean that Paul didn't ever eat meat again? It says, therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, he wouldn't eat meat. Now, if Paul knew he was going to someone's house that was struggling with this, would he bring along meat that was sacrificed to an idol? Of course not. If he went somewhere that people were properly educated, and I'm not putting the others down, please don't take that. But if he went somewhere to someone's house, they understood the difference properly, and everybody there did, and meat was served, certainly there would be no problem with it. One thing in one situation could be sinful, but in another situation, it might not be. Boy, don't you wish things were absolutely black and white and no gray area at all? Well, we have to know what's going on, and we have to know those people around you. A lot of this is think about your brother or your sister first. Other words, if somebody's struggling with something that they think is a sin, don't go doing that in front of them, even if you know it's not. That's where the education piece comes in. How do you get around this? Are you always going to allow them to be weak? Are you always going to allow them to believe something that is not correct? No. In love, you help them with that understanding. But we do need to be careful with our freedoms, because we could mess somebody up. The kicker is if we know it and do it. There's, quite frankly, there are things for us that might be a sin, or for other people it might not be, depending on what our conscience holds. It's just a true statement. We just need to be aware of it and be careful of it. Picking up actually in chapter 9 now. Some people think here he's changing subjects, but he's not really changing subjects. Paul's doing the same. Paul is using himself as an example and what he did to show what he just talked about in chapter 8. He goes, am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you. For you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us? As do the other apostles and the Lord's brothers and Cephas. Or is it only I and Barnabas who lack the right to not work for a living? Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Asking a rhetorical question. No one. Who plants a vineyard and does not eat the grapes? No one. Who tends a flock and does not drink the milk? No one. Do I say this merely on human authority? Doesn't the law say that the same thing? For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. Is it about oxen that God is concerned? Of course not. Verse 10. Surely he says this for us, doesn't he? Yes. This was written for us because whoever plows and threshes should be able to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. If we have sown spiritual seeds among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have the right to support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more? In other words, if a traveling preacher comes through, stays with y'all a few months, and you take up a love offering and you give it to him, doesn't he have a right to it? Of course they would. But we see here in the second part of verse 12, Paul goes on to say, but we did not use this right. They had the right to take money from them to support themselves while they were ministering to them. But we did not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. In other words, Paul did not want anyone to make the statement or the claim, well, they're just doing this for a living. This is how they make money. That's not why they were doing this. Paul was concerned about that. Rightfully so in some cases. Goes on in verse 13. Don't you know that those who serve in the temple get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. Verse 15. But I have not used any of these rights, and I am not writing this in the hope that you will do such things for me. For I would rather die than allow anyone to deprive me of this boast. For when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, since I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging the trust committed to me. What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel I may offer it free of charge, and so not make full use of my rights as a preacher of the gospel. Paul certainly could have taken money. Paul certainly could have made his living preaching. Paul's actually saying here that that's the way it's supposed to be. But I'm going to the point, I'm afraid of anybody saying I'm making money on the Lord, basically. He's using this as an example. Paul had the opportunity and the right to take money and it not be sinful for preaching. But he was afraid that there could be some people out there that would not come to Christ because of the thought that's all he was doing. So he chose not to. Paul chose to make a sacrifice for the furtherment of the kingdom. Just like he was referring to the people that knew it was not sinful to eat the meat, that they should be making a sacrifice to help further the kingdom. They knew, yes, that was not sinful. But they didn't know that they should have been careful in how they do it, and that there are times we may need to forego our freedoms in Christ to help our weaker brother. Verse 19. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I have become like the Jews, to win the Jews. To those under the law I have become like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I have become like one not having the law, although I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. What is Paul saying here? He's like, I've become a slave to everyone. If I'm going to talk to the Jews, I'm not going to invite them over to my house and serve pork. I am going to follow the Jewish traditions while I am basically preaching to the Jews. Even though he says, I am not under the law. He's saying, look, I've got the freedom. I could have pork, but that's not good for what I'm trying to do. And just like here, he says, as to win those under the law, not under the law, I become like those not having the law. Other words, talking about Gentiles, he doesn't go somewhere and say, oh, you have to be in the synagogue this morning. The Sabbath is holy. You can't take only so many steps on Saturday. But what he doesn't do, if you notice, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, that means he doesn't go into the temples there and commit sexual sin just so he could be like the Gentiles to win some. That'd be like us going somewhere and getting plastered or any other sin just to be like someone sinning. You know the old saying, Jesus ate with the tax collectors, but he didn't go out collecting taxes with them that were illegal. He ate with the sinners, he just didn't participate in the sin. The same thing we should be doing. To the weak, he says, to the weak I become weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I might share in its blessings. We're going to have to stop right there. Didn't get all the way through chapter 9. We're running out of time there. But so we had these two groups. One thought it was bad to do something. The other one said, no, it's okay. The ones that said it's okay understood properly. The weaker brother still thought it was bad. Paul's like, you got to look out for that weaker brother. Just like we have to look out for our brothers and sisters today, be it whatever it may be. Whether it be dress, whether it be being fat, who knows? You never know what you're going to come across. That people, maybe it could even be eating meat. Now, there may be a time of education in this, but we should do all of it with love and with the interest of the weaker brother at the forefront of our minds. Because what are we all here for? To make a decision. We need to make sure we don't trip somebody else in their journey. That ain't good. Well, we love you all. Hope y'all have a wonderful evening. Any questions, give us a holler. Shoot us a text, shoot us an email, shoot us a private message, make a comment. We hope you have a wonderful evening.